You are part of the Minnesota crew. Of all the guys I don't understand how, what was it, 6 of you managed to come out of one high school? Like big names?
Boy, I don't know. There's a lot. I don't know what the count is, but there's a lot.
Shall I, well, I'll test your brain. Go on, how many out of the same high school?
No, okay, so the same high school. Okay.
Yeah, how many? And the names?
Um, John Nord, Brady Boone,
Hmm.
Tom Zink, me, Rick Rude. Um, who else from the same high school? Curt Hennig. There's probably a couple more.
Is someone shouting
I
names at you now?
no. I think that's it from Robbinsdale High School.
I had one more name, but it might be wrong. Nikita?
Nikita. Yeah. How did I forget Nikita?
Of all the guys all the wrestlers who came out the same high school, I don't know what they were feeding you guys, but some sort of like wrestling brain food, every day at the canteen. But of all those guys I mentioned or you mentioned, were you actually friends with them in school?
Yes. Yes. Every one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In fact, Nikita grew up about 6 blocks from me, and we used to play, baseball and played football in high school together. And Rick Rude grew up 2 or 3 blocks from me, and as kids we all grew up together. And well, all of us, we all grew up together. Tom Zink, we were on the same baseball team growing up. John Nord, you know, knew him forever, best friends. So yeah, all these guys, we all grew up together, but we all had different friends too. And, it wasn't like we all hung around together all the time.
So, what was it genuinely that sort of led so many people to wrestling? Was it? I mean, I can't even think of this list. Who actually got into wrestling first, and did they encourage other people to do it?
Yeah, I think, Curt Hennig was the first one. And, his dad was Larry the Axe Hennig. So we all watched wrestling because Curt was our friend and his dad was in wrestling. And the AWA with Vern Gagne and Nick Bockwinkel, Larry Hennig, all these guys there was real big around Minneapolis. So we all watched it, and it was because of it's Curt's dad out there.
Hmm.
And, I used to train at the gym with Curt. We were training partners. And I used to always say to Curt, when are you going to get into wrestling? He says, I don't want to get into wrestling. And I knew he was going to get in, but he wanted to get bigger and, look more like a professional wrestler. And then finally one day he says, Barry, I can't train with you anymore. I'm going to Vern's camp. And that was kind of the start of one of us guys getting into wrestling. And all the rest of us, never really even thought about getting into wrestling. But Hawk and Animal and Rick Rude and myself, we all worked at a bar, and we were all weightlifters, big guys. And Eddie Sharkey was a bartender at Grandma B's where we used to work. And every night we'd throw people out of the bar, and there was fights every night. And, at 2 o'clock in the morning after work was done, we'd all sit around and have a couple of beers. And finally, Eddie says one day, I'm going to get you guys into professional wrestling. And we kind of laughed about it, but we all, in the back of our minds really wanted to, because Curt was already getting in, and it was just kind of neat to do, but we never thought we'd even have an opportunity to get in.
Hmm.
So Eddie says, hey, I'm going to start a camp. And it was us 4 in the camp, and it was in a church basement with a terrible boxing ring with nails sticking up out of the floor. I mean, it was brutal. And that's how we all got started. And Eddie never smartened us up to wrestling. We all believed wrestling was the real thing. And you knew by watching it that some of it wasn't, but you didn't really know. So when we got in the ring, we beat the hell out of each other. I mean, every day after camp, we'd look at each other and go, why are we doing this to each other? Why don't we just lay off a little bit, So now we weren't laying punches in so hard and this and that. And then it got easier in the camp. And then finally Eddie brought in a couple other pro wrestlers that we wrestled. It was like, holy cow, this is what it's like, and that's how we learned.
How come Eddie did this for you? Was he getting like a percentage of future contracts, or did you pay him a fee or something?
paid him a fee, and he just loved the business, and he had some great connections. One of the first things he did when we were in the bar working, he brought in Ole Anderson. So Ole came in. Everybody knew Ole because he was the Minnesota Wrecking Crew. And he came in, introduced himself to us, and he says, well, one day I'll get you guys down to Atlanta on WTBS TV. And, we were all excited, but you didn't think it was going to happen. And then, about 2 months into our camp and everything, Ole called and said he wanted to bring Animal, who was Joe Laurinaitis. He wanted to bring him in for a week to work. So Joe was the first one to get out of camp. He got down to Charlotte, North Carolina, a few other places, and his first match. And now back then, Joe was about 300 pounds in shape and was a monster. And we're all young and full of piss and vinegar. He goes down there and he thinks he's going to be squashing all these guys and everything. His first match he has with Johnny Weaver, who was probably 60 years old back then. And Joe lost to Johnny Weaver in about 30 seconds with the sleeper hold. So after about a week, Joe was a little bit disappointed, and he comes back to camp and we're all excited for him. How was it? He goes, can you believe it? I got beat by frickin' Johnny Weaver. He's 100 years old and put the sleeper on me. I'm 3 times the size of him. So he learned what the business was like, and Ole was testing him to make sure that, Joe would do anything he wanted to do. And then, Rick went someplace, and then I ended up going to Hawaii and everything. But that was Eddie Sharkey who got us all into the business.
Now I'm going to ask 2 questions. You've got to give us the true answer. Who was the strongest, and who was the biggest badass out of you, the Road Warriors, Rick Rude, that initial core group?
Well, everybody was strong in their different ways. I was the strongest weightlifter.
Any records? What are your record lifts then?
I had a 777 squat. I had an 805 deadlift, and I was going for a 600 bench. On my 3rd rep, I tore my pec at 545, which was really easy. But at that time, I was doing about 550, 560. And the biggest badass, I suppose, well, between Rick Rude and Mike Hagstrand Hawk, those two, they were badasses in their own way. It's hard to say who was the one, but neither of them were scared of nobody or anything. They didn't care if they were going to get beat up. They didn't care what was going to happen. They loved to fight. And that was the 2 worst things that you could go against, was somebody who didn't care if they lost or loved to fight. You know what I mean? So that's kind of how it was. Joe was a big, strong teddy bear.
With Rude and Hawk, who would more often sort of, I don't know, who would be the first out of those 2 to maybe stop a fight at Grandma B's, or anything, just get involved essentially?
Well, all of us would get involved. And if one guy was in a fight, it'd be 4 of us. That's just how it was, no matter what would happen. But at Grandma B's, it was always, please, will you leave, to the customer, you have to leave the bar. You're out of control. We would really like you to leave. And then I'm going to give you one more chance. You have to leave. Next thing you know, there's 4 guys on you, and boom, they're out the door. That's how it was. Is
the Roadhouse rule, the cooler? Is Roadhouse is quite true to life in that sense?
Yes, it was like that, because you didn't want lawsuits, and the police department was fantastic because they all knew us. We were friends with them, so they knew that we're not just going to jump on somebody. We're going to, give people breaks and everything. But then you had to get them out of there. I mean, it was just one of those things. And the bar was so crowded all the time. It was a strip bar during the day, and then they had live bands at night. So by the time the end of the night would come, the people were just wild, So great place though.
Huh. It sounds like the kind of place that you just don't do anymore.
They don't do it anymore.
It sounds like a shame.
And you couldn't throw people out of the bar like we did back then either.
Back in the old days, eh?